So this was initially going to be a lovely little pedalboard build video, but things didn't go quite to plan. I thought rather than scrap the footage, I'd show it anyway and, let you learn from my mistakes. Okay, so disassembly went well as expected. This is always the most fun part of the pedalboard build. In a single minute you can undo hours of work, and it's so satisfying to see a clean board, especially after so long of it being populated with a bunch of pedals. Straight after disassembly though, I ran into my first major hurdle. I pulled the old wide velcro off because it was covering some of the cable ports. I switched to a thinner velcro and then promptly ran out before I'd even covered the board. Since I was already in the zone, I carried on building the board despite the pedals being super wobbly and not secure, generally just ignoring the red flags here. Of course, this would be a decision that I would later come to regret. I don't know if I love the Templeboard system in general. I think if you're using a Chox power supply and the temple plates and all of the modules, then it will likely work great, but it's a very all or nothing approach. Since I'm already in deep enough with the patch bay module and the IEC mod that gives me my power, I'm sort of stuck with this system. Maybe I'll upgrade my power supply in the future, but this Harley Benton one has been serving me well, despite not fitting seamlessly with the Templeboard system. I was working off a plan I made on Rockboard, but as is typical, I failed to fully account for the cabling. It would have worked fine on any other pedalboard system, such as the pedal train. It's really just the Templeboard causing issues with the top mount jacks on the bottom row of the board. There are ways to make it work with the Templeboard, but not without spending more money on what was already a pretty deep money pit. If I do rebuild, there are a few things I could do to clean it up. I could get lower profile cables, some solderless ones with more flexible cabling that would take up less space and generally look less bulky. I could go for a bigger pedal board. This would let me space stuff out a bit more, and since this board never leaves the house, portability isn't really a concern of mine. I could remove some pedals and have the board set up more sort of traditionally spaced, but I'm not sure if I can forego any of these pedals. On to the next major hurdle, a serious mess of cables under the board. Since these are all predetermined lengths of cable, there are a lot of cables bunching up around the board, and the style of jacks that I use on my cables means that it's especially messy at the patch bay, and also on the back of the board where the HX1 cables are dangling over. I could have been smarter and used cable ties to tidy them up rather than just pulling them around the board, but I don't like the idea of anything on this board being too locked down. Speaking of the patch bay, I ought to mention why I'm even using one in the first place. It's so that I can easily run in 4 cable methods straight into my amp, or run it all into the front end of amps or plugins. My pedal board does a few different setups and I need it to work smoothly with all of them. So now you're starting to see the main mess on top of my board. This big thick braid of cables forming from all of the top mount jacks with the bulky ends and the non-flexible cables. I need to get this sorted out if I want to be happy with my board, but since it's functional, I guess I can live with it for now. If I switch to thinner cables, I could probably get an extra mini pedal or two onto the board. As you saw, I ripped off the mini delay pretty quickly when I realised it was blocking the only available cable port. So that's the finished board. Now let's get out of this time lapse and we'll talk about it and go through some tones. So here is the finished pedal board. One of the issues I keep having with it is that I keep hitting 2 pedals at once, especially in this sort of area where we've got the Zander Siclone right next to the HX1. The sort of dual pedals next to each other, that just doesn't work. The ergonomics on this are really just all over the place. Another main issue is this great big channel of cables across the middle. It's just super unsightly. I think the main thing that's worrying me though is that it's just not secure. It just doesn't feel very sturdy, and I think that's something that I'd like to fix on my next board. A rebuild is on the way though. I've got a bigger pedal board coming in next week. Just a side note, if you are enjoying this video, please feel free to drop me a like, a subscribe, a comment. All that sort of stuff really goes a long way towards helping me out. So despite me not being very happy with the pedal board itself, I'm very happy with the tones, as obviously these are some of my favourite pedals that I've got in my collection. Let's run through the pedals that I've picked. We've got the Peterson StroboStomp tuner, we've got the Earthquaker Devices Plumes, we've got the Life is Unfair Bad Machine, the Demiurge Doomy, we've got the TT Electronic Tailspin, the Mooer Delay Mooer Reverb, we've got the Electro-Harmonix Small Stone Chorus, which is a new acquisition for me. I'm enjoying this one so far. We've got the Zander Siclone Fuzz, and we've also got the HX1. I'm going to throw a demo clip in here using my PRS S2 with the Evertune through my Orange Rockverb's Dirty channel. I'm not going to do a full deep dive into every single one of these pedals, but this should hopefully give you an idea of what I'm intending to use the board for. learned a few seemingly obvious things from this pedalboard build. The main one being just plan in advance. Plan the board before you start buying parts for it. Pedalboards are an ecosystem. Everything from the size of the board, the cabling you're using, the power supply, and the actual board itself, like which brand you go for. All of these things are going to impact other decisions you make later on down the line, and it's good to really plan them all out early. If you're planning on cramming out the board with as many pedals as you can, like I've done here, it's worth looking into getting the smallest cables you can. If you're wanting things to be super neat and you don't want that great big bundle of spaghetti under your board, look into getting custom length cables instead of just off-the-shelf things. Now, of course, pedalboards are modular. I can always swap these cables out and get some custom ones in. I can swap my power supply out and get a custom power supply. I could even swap the board itself. But all of these things, you know, if you're buying them new, then you've got to resell them used, and you're taking a loss every time you do that. It's a big expense to undertake and a lot of effort just to sell off some of this stuff. So to wrap things up, this board didn't go to plan, but hopefully you can learn from my mistakes. At least it won't be too long before I can rebuild this one to a point where I'm happy with it. So thank you for watching. I've been Kai.